Guys, I feel so disconnected.
Without these headphones,
It's really hard.
I don't know how you guys do this.
It's very well. We don't. So Tommy and I, when we record together, just the two of us.
Yeah.
We don't hear any of the music at all. We don't even talk about the music. I think Carly likes those episodes more.
How do you guys have a podcast? What is your podcast about?
It's this podcast.
What?
It's the Physics of Faith podcast.
What? No.
Yeah. So I don't know if you know this. So there's two types of episodes we do. We do these goofier episodes that have you in them, and those tend to go a little bit longer, like an hour to an hour and 20 minutes, because you talk a lot. And then we do an episode where it's just me and Tommy, and we read a chapter out of a book of the Bible, and then we break it down.
But you do that without drums?
It's hard to break down without drums.
That's what I'm saying.
You need drums for a good breakdown.
Drums for a good breakdown.
That's right.
Oh, man. Yes.
All right. Well,
I'm more of a guitar guy myself.
Yeah.
you've exposed the issue with our setup, but
We're here.
we're here.
We're back, all three of us,
We're back.
together.
Tommy, welcome back.
Thank you. Thanks for having me back. I guess I didn't screw up the last one too bad. Now that you're having me back for another one.
No, well, we actually brought you back because we have some news.
Okay.
We really had to. We wanted to do it on.
Have you guys traded me to another
Yeah,
podcast?
we got somebody else waiting to come in and think, yeah.
We wanted to do it on the podcast. Yeah, because we thought it would be less awkward to fire you in front of everybody.
We're sending you to another podcast for future prospects.
Yeah. Just go ahead and pack your things up. No.
Wait, the commissioner approved that?
Yeah. Yep.
Well, we're glad that you're back. I thought the last one went really well.
Went longer than apparently you guys are used to, but whatever.
Well, yeah. Well,
Well, I still probably talked less than I normally do, though.
it's probably true. That's probably true.
Oh man.
Well, and the other ones, it's just the two of us, right?
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So if you figure that's only half and half, that's 15 minutes and 15 minutes.
Yeah.
But that was like hour 20, but I still probably only talked for about 15 minutes.
That's true.
you take up a lot of airtime, Brendan.
I'm really here for space filling. That's really what I'm here
That's
for.
that's really it. When
Yeah.
I don't have something good to say, you're here to fill in the.
while you think of what good to say. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we've already discussed this. I'm the talent.
Look, my contract was always just to be the Ed McMahon. Remember?
Well, no, yeah,
That's right.
we said that, Brandon, you and I are actually obsolete. We don't.
Right.
We're actually not needed.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah.
I keep you guys around because it makes me feel better about myself. All right. Well, this is why these go long, is because we have these super long intros where we just say nonsense. All right. So today we're going to talk about love. What is love?
Baby, don't hurt me.
A little Night at the Roxbury. We're going to talk about love, what the Bible says about love, and kind of what, not just the Bible, but what Jesus pulls out about love, what Paul writes about love. And we're also going to look a little bit at like what the world says about love. Mm-hmm. And the world, and I hear this all the time, people say this all the time, both in the world and those who are of the kingdom of heaven will say, the whole point of the Bible is love. Jesus was all about love.
Yeah, all you need is love.
All you need is love.
Beatles.
Yeah. The Beatles were three talented musicians and songwriters and John Lennon.
I did not think that's where that was going.
I was actually going to single out Ringo, but what?
Everybody was going.
Yeah.
You know what?
Ringo's always the obvious one. Right?
Everybody wants to single out Ringo, but you know what? I'm not going to break down his drums. He is a phenomenal drummer. He really he knows what he's doing.
Yes.
And here's the thing: he does what what is necessary for his role.
Would you say what his talents are? He takes care of the talents that
he does. But
he
was But John thinks that
he's the one who thinks he should have 5 talents.
Yeah. And he should have none.
Yeah. And Yoko buried it for him. So.
Imagine.
Yeah.
All right. So anyway, that's why that song is actually why I can't stand John Lennon, because think about the hubris of that song.
Yeah.
Because what he is singing in that song is the world would be so much better if all of you acted like I do.
Right. Yeah.
Anyway, love.
Right. That's that's a type of love. Actually, it is.
That is
That is a type of love. Yeah.
Well, yeah, because he's thinking, imagine there's no heaven,
Right.
and all we had was love. Wouldn't that be much better?
Yeah.
Right. Man, how do you get those two so separated? Okay, so let's start with here's the thing. People who say that Jesus was all about love, they're not wrong.
Right.
Sure.
God is love, 100%.
God is love, right? So let's take a look at Matthew 22, verses 34 through 40. But when the Pharisees heard that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together. And one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question. Yeah, that's where you have a problem. Asked him a question, testing him. Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law? And he said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the great and foremost commandment. The second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Upon these two commandments hang the whole law and the prophets. So like Jesus right here is telling the religious folk, right? And this is why these messages of these, again, we're going to use the word deconstructionists and humanists and people who are kind of opponents of the scripture.
Right.
Like you read this and you say, yeah, Jesus just said the greatest commandment is to love.
To love, right.
It's to love.
Right.
So love. We
Right.
should all love.
If you do these two things, you do everything right. You
Right.
love this and you love this. That's everything you need to know.
That's everything you need to know.
Yeah.
Right.
And he's not wrong because he's Jesus.
Right.
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 But sometimes we're wrong in how we
100%.
maybe how we interpret that.
Our definition of love is wrong.
100%.
Exactly.
If we understood it the way he meant it, we're right. But as we will probably talk about,
Yeah.
what the world thinks of love is not Jesus' definition.
Also, our priority is wrong
Right.
Yeah.
because he says the first commandment and the greatest commandment is to love God.
God. Right.
Yeah.
And the second is to love others.
Right.
Right. So you can't love others if you're not loving God.
Right.
I think that's in 1 John.
Right.
All right. So it gets us kind of to this question we've just raised is what is love?
Right.
Again, baby, don't hurt me. I can't say that and not think that.
Yeah.
You're in the era.
Yeah. I just think of Will Ferrell. Every time he says
Anybody
that.
younger than
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
40 has 35 no
has
idea
no
what we're
idea.
talking
Will
about.
Ferrell, Chris Kattan, Night at the Roxbury. Don't watch the movie, but maybe look up the clip from SNL when they had Jim Carrey on.
Yeah, that's a
and
good
he,
one.
And he
That's
was
a
the
good
third.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think they
Yes.
did one with Tom Hanks too, which
Yeah.
is
Did they?
also good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so what is love? Something that you and I have talked about on this episode. So we did a episode way long time ago, earlier this year. We talked about studying the Bible.
Right.
And love was one of those words that we brought up that when you read love in the Bible, it actually could mean a number of different things because in the Greek,
Right.
there were multiple words that would be translated into love.
Right.
But they all had slightly different meanings.
Right.
So I've actually got here 8 different types of love in the Greek. Okay, so the first one here is, you're my pronunciation guy here, but storge, okay, is a familial love, like a parent for a child or sibling, something in those lines, right? So it's that familial tie, that familial love. You have to love that person because they're your brother or your sister, right? Second is philia, which is an affectionate love, which involves friendship. This is really a quality friendship type thing. And this is where we get Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love.
Right.
Which is weird because then shouldn't it be Storgedelphia? Anyway.
I believe that's actually in Philadelphia. That's a
Storage is
place off of Elm and 12 where
That's
they
right.
where they put all your junk. Yeah.
That's right. So not trying to come after Philadelphia, but I think you got your Greek wrong. But it's an affectionate sense of love, right? And it's a friendship. The next one is philautia, which is love for self, which could also be considered self-esteem.
Right.
Right. So do you love yourself? Man, that is something that most self-help people in today's world will tell you is the beginning. They'll tell you that's the greatest commandment. You need to first love yourself.
Right.
Well, I was going to say, I think that's probably where the vast majority of the world is that's their definition, is in the self-love department. Yeah.
Okay, this next one is mania. So obviously you know where that's going. That one's pretty, but it's an obsessive love. It's an unhealthy obsession. So that word can be translated into love. Again, it's depending on the context. Ludus is a playful love. It's like flirting or seduction. Also like casual sex. It views love as a game. Okay, so man, this sounds a lot like certain areas of the modern
Right,
world,
right.
right? Then you have eros, which is physical love or sexual desire. It involves passion or romance. Biblically, it's synonymous with marital love because the idea is that sex is
For marriage.
for marriage.
Right.
Pragma was an interesting one. I never thought about this, but pragma is love based on duty or obligation. Pragma, obviously, pragmatism.
Right,
right.
This is a good match. Very Sense and Sensibility, very Pride and Prejudice,
Right.
kind of thing there.
Yeah, that one is also a lot of times associated with like nationalistic pride, like in that department. Yeah.
Okay. And then, of course, the last one is agape, which is unconditional sacrificial love. This is the love that Jesus speaks of when discussing God's love, loving God or loving others.
Right.
The thing about agape love is it's selfless.
Right.
It's about putting others ahead of yourself. So these are the 8 different ones. Now, the ones we see the most in the Bible are philia, we see eros, and we see agape. Like those are the ones that we see the most biblically. But the rest of these we see quite often in the world with how the world looks at love and how it interprets love. Right?
You'll see it a lot in like Greek literature is where you'll actually see a lot of it. Like plays, things like that.
Funny how that works. That the 3 types that the Bible talks about are not the ones that we see the most often in the world. It's the other 5 that we see most often in the world.
You're quite right. So I think here's Romans 5:8. But God demonstrates his own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Again, this is agape, right? So whenever Jesus talks about love, he's not talking about fulfilling your own desires, which is the philautia, but putting others before you. Right. So as you kind of go through some of these, like some of these are perfectly fine. Right. Like familial love, like loving your family. We should all do that, right? God calls us to do that. Having loving friendships, that's a good thing. Now, mania, obviously, no, probably not.
Yeah, not a good idea.
Not really a thing you want to talk about in the sense of love. But when you get to some of these, like, okay, eros is even not a bad thing.
Right.
When it's in the
correct context.
There's a whole book about that. In the Bible about that.
But when it's out of context, when it's out of the correct context, it really becomes more of the ludus, which is the casual or the kind of gamifying romance.
Right.
Yeah.
Kind of playing that game. And there's so many like weird podcasts and talk shows now. I see them come up on my YouTube feeds. It's weird because I don't know all the right terms for some of these things, but like there's this whole like red pill movement and the whole like Andrew Tate stuff and like I say these things because I know I've heard them, but I don't actually know what a lot of them are. But there's a lot of this. Somehow, a lot of that has seeped its way into conservatism.
Sure.
And so when I'll catch something on a conservative podcast, sometimes what they'll do is they'll pull stuff from these things to show you either how ridiculous somebody is or potentially show you something that's contrary to what the world sees it as, right?
Sure.
So there is a podcast. I'm not going to name it. I don't think you should go watch it. And we've talked about it before on this, where they'll bring in people of all these different types of walks of life, and they'll actually have conversations about these things, about relationships.
Right.
And you'll have these men and women who think of love and sex as casual, and it's a game, and they can be separate from each other, and they'll sometimes be debating somebody like a Lila Rose, who's sitting on the other side of that, saying that's not how God intended your life to be, and you'll find much more fulfillment if you do it this way.
Right.
It's a very interesting thing, but this is how it's weird for me to see some of these things and think this is how people think.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. No, love is a completely selfish term, right? I think it's funny because like so often when we talk about love in the world's context, like everybody has a different definition of love. Like when you say love, like it's kind of like how all of the podcasts that we do on this end that take hours, like we're defining terms, right? It's like setting things up. And I think part of the reason why we have to do that is because there's so many different, like, I mean, right now, if we just said this is a podcast about love, I mean, we've already kind of shown our hand a little bit because we've talked about
Sure.
it. But if we just said there's a million different ways people could go with this.
Yeah.
Because there's a million different definitions. The difference between Christians and the world is our definition is not based on anything we want or we get to define, but on how God defines love.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's also important to, like, say we take Ludus, for example, which
Right.
is one of the ones that we would look at and say, this is not godly.
Right.
We would even say that's not actual love, but it's what the Greeks defined as love. It's a word that the Greeks
Right.
used to define romantic entanglement.
Right.
And so often,
They're basically confusing lust for love.
exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But this is what the world does. This is what they want to tell you. And it's funny, we talk about defining terms.
Right.
This is why when the world talks about love, they so often say love is love is love is love. Right.
Right. You can't
Which
use
is a perfect definition.
Yeah.
Totally understandable.
It's 100% nonsense.
Right.
To say that. But it's said, and the world uses that because by setting it up that way,
Right.
they don't define it.
They don't have to.
They don't have to define it.
Right.
So, but what they're trying to do is use love as a blanket for any and all actions that they might
That they want.
participate in.
Right.
And say, well, you're against love
Right.
because you're against the things that I do.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's the greatest, one of the greatest lies that is being peddled and being, fed in main society is that basically love equals agreement.
Yeah.
If you see you'll see one side here that says, I think differently than this. I disagree with you on this. I'm not all whatever in the most you could say whatever it is you're saying in the most godly way possible, and then the other side comes back with, no, love. We love.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, yeah, I of course that's not opposite of what I'm saying. I love you as much as I do. I just disagree with you. And that is the big misunderstanding is that, to love means to go along with, to appreciate, to
Accept and affirm.
accept and affirm. Absolutely.
Right.
And I think that's where, it's I guess as you're kind of talking about that experience, love, like in our worldview, in God's worldview, love does not let you celebrate wrong. God does not, love does not let you identify as something that is contrary to how God created you.
Right.
Right. So that's the thing is, we can sit here and say this because I can hear the counter argument to kind of what you're saying in my head because I've heard it whenever I've had this conversation. It's like, well, look, we can have a disagreement and I still love you. I can be in disagreement with you. But what the world does is it says, no. My definition of love is my identity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And when you deny my identity, what it leads to is laws that tell me I can't live out my identity. And therefore, you are perpetuating violence and persecution against me. So how can you tell me that you love me if you truly want to see me incarcerated or even potentially, as they do in a lot of Middle Eastern Muslim countries, executed?
Yeah, and I think the way you introduce that is the answer is like the reason I maybe disagree with you or I say that I believe that the way you identify is not biblical or whatever. If I saw you running towards a cliff at full speed, I would tell you to stop because I love you and I don't want you to run off that cliff and die.
Yeah.
Even though you may like running, you may think that you're going the right way. Maybe you're enjoying where you're going. You see something ahead of you that you want, but you don't see this giant cliff in front of you. And I see it. And so I'm trying to save you from that, which is why I'm doing it because I love you.
Yeah. It's thrilling to fly until you realize you're falling. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where the world misses it when they want to identify sin as their identity and they want to see sinful things as being love because it feels good when they get off that cliff.
Yep.
At some point, you're going to hit the bottom.
Well, and I think you just said it. I think one of the other, I said the biggest lie that's been peddled is that, people think that love equals agreement, but really when you get down to it, people think that love is a feeling. And it's not. The Bible defines, the way the Bible defines love, it's not a feeling, it's more of an action. And I'm sure we can talk about that more in depth, but I think that's probably where all that stems, is it's how you feel, it's that feeling, when Paul very clearly says that love are these things, and none of them are feelings.
Wasn't it Boston who said it's more than a feeling?
Yeah,
that's right.
It is.
Yeah. we got all kinds of music.
It's perfect. I didn't want to talk about worship tonight.
That's right. Where's Warren?
Where's Warren? Yeah.
We got secular music.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so the world, we've kind of been dancing around this, but the world tells us love is getting what you want. Mm-hmm. Right? Love is about getting your needs met. It's about uncontrolled desire. Mm-hmm. True love is letting go of self-control to take what you want. Mm-hmm. Loving yourself is doing what you want and accepting what you want. Loving others is accepting whatever they want you to accept about them, as long as it doesn't impact you directly, because you can't let your love for someone else encroach upon your love for yourself.
Right.
In the world's view. The world's love is selfish. It focuses on how you feel and what you want. The other person is there to provide you with something, and you only reciprocate if your feelings are aligned.
Right.
That is the way the world looks at love. And, we've kind of illustrated it a little bit. We've danced around a few of the topics there, but like you've said, love isn't a feeling. It's funny, I mentioned, we talked about pragmatic love, and I talked about Jane Austen and Pride and Prejudice and stuff, right? It's weird. We were kind of taught by modern society that a pragmatic relationship isn't loving,
right?
But in fact, it very well could be.
Sure.
Now, is it for everyone? No.
Right.
But what the world tells you is that it's the person that makes you want to lose your self-control. Mm-hmm. It's the person who makes you want to do the things that you think are forbidden. Mm-hmm. That is what love is. But as you've already pointed out, that's not love. That's lust. And, and that's the pursuit of personal pleasure and desire.
Right. Well, it's like when I do marriage counseling, I always hear people, they a lot of times will say, I just don't love the person anymore. Or we've fallen out of love. Mm-hmm. I'm like, that's a weird statement. When you really actually think about it,
right.
What does that mean? And when you really boil down to it, it's we've lost the passion, we've lost the fight. It's nothing to do with true, genuine concepts of love and devotion and commitment. The things that we as Christians usually talk about when we talk about love. It's always these worldly definitions of self-fulfillment. Yeah. Right. I've talked to a ton of people recently. It seems like it's like a pandemic. I don't even know what the other word, what it could be. I know it's a bad word to throw around, but so many people I just don't want to be married anymore. I don't love them. It's just it's like a switch you can just suddenly flip off. But I think kind of and I know what we're going to be talking about here soon is God's love has nothing to do with you. God's definition of love, you are not the subject in God's definition of love.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and when you look at when Paul says he says a couple different places in Ephesians, husbands, love your wives the way Christ loved the church.
Right.
That's a commandment.
Right.
Yeah.
And so when a husband says, I just don't love here, I heard this, I think it was, I can't remember who it was, but they do all kinds of marriage counseling and all marriage conferences. The leader was saying, I was counseling with this couple, and the guy says, I just don't love her anymore. And he replies so you're disobeying God.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, that's what it comes down to. And you ask, where does that come from? And I think that we've touched on why. The world is telling us to put yourself above others.
Right.
To love yourself first. Right. And so I don't love them. I don't want to be married anymore. It comes down to, they're not giving me what I need, or they don't make me feel the way that I want, that I need to feel. They're not making me feel a certain way.
It's about fulfillment,
which is it's literally the opposite. You are to love them by doing things. It is what you do, what you do for them, how you show it, not what they make you feel.
Right. And you got to go back. I mean, just go back to like how we started this whole conversation. Like, what is the greatest commandment? Jesus starts by saying, love God.
Yep.
All your heart. He gives this idea of what's like the Shema, which, it comes out of Deuteronomy and all this stuff. And then he goes on and says the second one is like this: love your neighbor as yourself, right?
Yeah.
Like so yourself is third in the list, and it's not even really in the list. I think it's hilarious. Jesus kind of is I know maybe I shouldn't say this because when we say assume, we like to say but Jesus is making the assertion that these people, he already knows you love yourself.
Yeah.
So he's like, I don't need to define you need to love yourself. In fact, what I need to say is you need to love yourself less.
Yeah.
And the way you want to treat yourself, king or queen, however you want to talk, like that's how you should be treating others.
Yeah.
And before all of that, by the way, God is the one you love.
Right.
So I think it's just when we start to talk about love, we have to immediately take a pivot away from this idea, like Tommy just said, fulfillment, the lusty side of it. Like love is, like you said, some ways, and this sounds unromantic, but it is sometimes pragmatic.
It is.
But the part about the difference between agape love is that it's not always pragmatic. It's not always what the world would assume is logical and sensical.
Yeah, everybody has different love languages too, and I don't want to get into those specifically, but like,
Sure.
There's nothing more romantic to me than keeping your commitments.
Sure, 100%.
Like, there's something to be said about that, and like as Tommy already put it, like when someone says I don't love them anymore, what you're saying is they don't cause me to feel a specific way
Right.
anymore, and so again, like, and then as you pointed out. How I feel is really third on this list.
Right.
And Jesus does lay it out there, assume or assert or however you want to put it.
Yeah.
Like caring about ourselves comes naturally.
Right. Exactly. Right. Yeah.
It's caring about somebody else that is more challenging.
Mm-hmm.
We watched a movie last night with my family and I watched a movie. It's called Amsterdam. It's all right.
Mm-hmm.
You take a look. It's got Margot Robbie in it, and it's got Christian Bale in it, and a few other.
Sounds so familiar.
There's a lot of big name actors in it, actually. But there's a scene where Zoe Saldana's in it, where she's trying to define love, and she says something to the effect of, "Loving someone isn't needing them; it's choosing them."
Yeah.
Which, to a degree, like, just that tiny segment could really be applied to this context here, right? Is that like it's not about what I need, it's about choosing to provide somebody else with what they need.
Right.
Right. And so what we do, I think, sometimes, especially when we're young and in love, is we think that person's worthy of it. And somewhere down the line we decide they're not worthy of it anymore.
Right.
And that's the part is that God says is people are always worthy of love.
Right.
Right. But I think it's also interesting here is like when God's talking about love, like we've done such a we've really kept this about romance and marriage, right?
Right.
Agape love extends beyond that.
Yeah.
And I think this is that trap where we're kind of only talking about romance and marriage and attractions and things like that. That's what the world does.
Right.
Nothing made me more angry. Well, that's hyperbole. But I'm a huge Captain America fan.
Sure.
Okay. When they came out with Captain America and the Winter Soldier, Bucky is like his best friend and his tie.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
To his tie to go watch the movie.
Right.
Captain America: Winter Soldier is the best Marvel movie ever made. We're not going to continue that conversation beyond that.
I do like it. Yeah, I think it's good. Yeah.
And there was immediately these circles that I saw that would like rate these movies and talk about these movies, and people who were into this fandom that were immediately like, oh, they should have a romance.
Yes, I heard.
And like, oh, Steve and Bucky should be an item.
Yeah.
Right. And you can all these conversations about the representation, all this stuff, and I'm like, cannot two men have a loving relationship that is
100%.
like, why does sex always have to be added to it?
Right.
This is what the world wants to do because it wants to pervert love as opposed to see the relationship and and
Right.
say, you know what, I wish I had some friends like that.
Right.
You know, instead that what they want to say, well, if you have friends like that, you probably should be sleeping with them.
Right. Right.
Yeah, there are factions of people who believe that David and Jonathan in the Old Testament were romantically
romantic.
involved.
100%.
Because David says like I love him more than a brother. He's a friend closer than a brother.
Yeah, right.
And just that type of loving relationship, that closeness between two men, it can't exist
Right.
today.
Oh, and when Jonathan dies.
outside
Yeah.
outside of a sexual relationship.
Right, exactly. And that's what people would try to impose a modern sensibility onto that and say, oh, they were probably gay for each other.
Right.
You know.
Well, this is where agape moves away from pragmatic or sexual love and all of those loves in the aspect of like it doesn't always make sense. Like the Bible talks about, like there is no greater love than a man or not a man, but one who would lay down his life for his friends. Right. This is what they're talking about. Jesus says this too. He calls his disciples friends in that moment. It's this beautiful moment of like. But it's not that he's going to lay down with his friends,
right?
You know what I mean? Like you know what I mean? Like you know what I'm saying? Like, but that's how, and the world will look at that, and the pragmatist will look at that and say, how is that love? How is dying love?
Right.
How is willing to go to that length?
You don't get to
love.
You don't get to enjoy that love.
Right. Exactly right. How is that? How is sending your son to die on a cross love? Because agape love is a different type. It's only explicitly used.
Yeah.
For the religious. I mean, I don't know what the religious. I mean, the God side of it. I mean, that's
really
God is the agape guy.
Yeah. Well, we talked about this once, and I shared that passage when we talked about kind of what these words in Greek with Peter, and Jesus is saying to Peter, "Do you love me?" And he asks it 3 times.
Right.
And he says, the first time he asks Peter, "Do you love me?" Peter responds, "Lord, you know that I phileo you."
Yeah.
So Jesus is saying agape, and Peter's saying phileo.
Yeah.
Which is why, he repeats it. He says it again.
Right.
And then Jesus comes back and says, "Do you phileo me?" And that's when Peter's grieved.
Right.
Because he realizes,
he's cheapening it.
He doesn't love God the way God loves him.
Right.
He doesn't love Jesus to the extent that Jesus loved him. Jesus was ready to die for him.
Right.
When Peter had to put his life on the line for him, or not put his life on the line, but surrender his life for him.
Yeah.
He denied him.
Right.
Peter was ready to kill for him.
Right.
He wasn't ready to die for him.
Right.
Right. And like he understood that in that moment.
Right.
And what was great about that was Jesus then told him, like, I get where you are. That's not where you're going to stay.
Right.
You're going to reach that level that you wanted to be at. So why don't we take a look at 1 Corinthians 13, because this is the love chapter. Mm-hmm. And so we'll just
strangely, can I just say this is funny? This is the one I read at probably every single wedding, and let's talk about how this
It doesn't have to do with romantic love.
Doesn't mention anything about romantic love. So go ahead. Yeah.
Right. Right.
Yeah, I was actually just about to say I cringe every time I hear a pastor say this at a wedding.
Yeah.
Well, you know what though? I think it's still pertinent at a wedding.
Oh yeah,
because,
of course it is.
Yeah.
Because again, the trap is that your marriage should always have a specific level of butterflies and romance. Right.
Yeah.
And sometimes the most romantic thing you can do is stick it out, or the most romantic thing you can do is die to yourself.
Right.
Well, yeah.
100%.
I mean, I firmly believe that love at first sight does not exist. Mm-hmm. It's lust at first sight. Mm-hmm. Because no guy has ever seen a woman across a crowded room and go, "Man, I'd like to hold her hair back while she throws up."
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah. But that's love. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
There's a comedy group, the Kids in the Hall, and they did a bit like that where they were catcalling people, and that was the kind of thing. Yeah, that was exactly what they were doing.
Yeah.
It's great commentary. Okay, 1 Corinthians 13, 4-7 says this: "Love is patient, love is kind, it is not jealous, love does not brag, it is not arrogant, it does not act disgracefully, it does not seek its own benefit. It is not provoked, does not keep an account of wrongs suffered. It does not rejoice in unrighteousness, but rejoices with the truth. It keeps every confidence. It believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things." So that's what
none of that has to do with marriage. I mean, it can.
And yet it does.
It can,
It
yes.
absolutely does. Like, I think about this, does not keep an account of wrong stuff.
Oh, yeah. For sure.
It's like, well, I'm not going to take the trash out because
Right, but
she
there's
didn't wash the dishes.
That is a very passionless definition of love.
It really, you're right.
You know, I mean, I love the fact that, first off, it highlights what we were saying earlier. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing.
Yeah.
So like love does not rejoice in that. But I also love this idea that it's what here, let me read it. Let me read your note right there. Hold on. It does not say it's not provoked.
Yeah.
I think that's an interesting, like when you said that, I was like, that's an interesting thing to associate with love. It's not provoked. Love is not provoked. What does that mean?
Well,
right? You know?
Yeah. Well, I probably need to pull out the Blue Letter Bible there, maybe look that up in the Greek. But, you know, like I believe when it's talking about this, love, I think you could take it one of two ways. Love is not provoked in that it is not pushed into anger.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Like when somebody is, but it's funny because some of the times it's the people that we love the most that push our buttons the most. But you could also say that, you know, love is not. No, I think the first one. I think that's really all there is to it.
Well, in the NIV, it's translated as "it is not easily angered."
Yeah, yeah, I think that's it.
And absolutely,
it's irritate, arouse to anger, scorn, despised, make angry, to exasperate. Yeah, like so it's not. It's not this kind of, because see, I think this, when I heard that, I immediately thought like there are so many people who have a toxic definition of love.
Yeah.
Right. Like love is like drama. You know what I mean? Like it's like, you know what I'm saying? Like as soon as I heard that, I was like, man, I know a couple people I've been talking to and I've been doing counseling with and some things like that through the last few months that like one person equates love with almost like it's like the mania definition, right? Like of this weird, crazy, like if there's not a I'm gonna stab that girl for looking at him sideways, like that's not love. You know what I mean? Like that's like, and so I think that's really interesting because that's the first time I've actually read that verse and I thought, oh, that's.
Well, you know what's interesting to me about that one in particular? I think it would make sense to everybody to say love does not provoke.
Right.
But what it actually says is love is not provoked.
Exactly right. Yeah.
So loving someone is refusing to let them provoke you.
Exactly right.
Right? It's all about controlling yourself as opposed to doing something to someone else.
Which goes hand in hand with the fruits of the Spirit, right? Self-control is one of the fruits of the Spirit, which is also love. It's one of the
love is one of the fruits of the Spirit.
So you see this idea of spiritual responsibility seeping into a definition of what the world would say, oh man, there should be passion in there, there should be date nights in there, there should be, there should be all this. No, there's not.
Yeah, and I mean, when you look at, just the first two, love is patient, love is kind, like that applies more to in traffic, than it even does in your marriage or in line at Walmart. I mean, that's you need to remember. This is a Bible verse to recite anytime you're out in public.
Right.
It is not jealous, it does not brag, or love does not brag. I mean, that is 100% talking about the workplace.
100%.
Not arrogant, does not act disgracefully. I mean, there's so many places that applies to before you ever get to marriage.
Right.
I mean, that's.
Well, I think too when you're in a state in a relationship like you are in marriage, or let's say you have a lifelong friend that like a David Jonathan situation, in those types of things, you're like, patience is a little bit easier, and you also expect it of yourself because you know it's the right thing in those situations,
right?
And you care about that person,
right?
So I don't have this verse written down, but one of the things that Jesus says as well is love. You've heard it said, "Love your neighbor as yourself." I tell you, love your enemy as yourself.
Right, exactly right.
Yeah, which is often the person in traffic or in line at Walmart.
Right.
Like it's because those people aren't people; they're obstacles.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's the way we look at them more often than not. But let's take those aren't really even enemies; those are people you're indifferent to.
Right.
Yeah.
What about the person that every time you get on Facebook wants to tell you how stupid you are for believing what you believe or for being of the political association that you're of or that wants to give you some conspiracy theory about something or, is just always pushing those buttons and never doing so with an attitude of upliftingness, but always with, I'm going to tear someone down. I'm going to tear them down because it's going to make me feel good, and everybody that agrees with me is going to applaud me.
Right.
Can you love that person?
Right.
Can you be patient with that person? Can you be kind to that person? Oftentimes I cannot.
Right.
You know, like I say I cannot. I don't want to limit myself here. Like I absolutely could.
Sure.
I don't want
It's
to.
difficult. Sure.
Yeah. There's a difference between can and want.
Well, that's why Jesus is such a great example, right? I mean, let's talk about this idea of love. Now let's put it on the cross, literally. Like as Jesus is being crucified, he says, "Father, forgive them." And he's not gaslighting them. You know what I mean? Like this is not a guilt trip. This is not like, like, oh guys, you're crucifying me. Forgive them. Like, no, like Jesus genuinely is loving his enemy in that moment, saying like, God, I pray for these people. Like I pray, it kind of goes back to what we talked about the last time we were together. Like the idea of the youth pastor that's like the blood of them, or the blood of your enemies going to hell sometimes can be on your hands by not showing them love. Now, like that doesn't mean God's going to be like, God is going to say, why didn't you love them? He's not going to say, why aren't they in heaven because of you? Like, but he is going to say like, remember when I told you to love and you didn't show love? Why? Why didn't you? Like, this is what we're accountable to.
Yeah. Well, God,
is these commands.
The God that didn't deserve it, and I think it wasn't too long ago we recorded and you brought this up about Carly,
right?
And she had posted this on her social media, so it was out there for everybody to see, but about kind of the idea of like, I need to cut that person out of my life because they're toxic, and they, or whatever the issue might be, and she heard the Holy Spirit say to her in that situation, man, aren't you glad I didn't do that to you?
Right.
And so for her, that was like a kind of the Holy Spirit. She was walking in the Spirit.
Right.
And the fruit of the Spirit of love was kind of like, let's take you a little bit further in love with that person.
Right.
Now, that's not to say that you should stay in abusive relationships.
No.
That's not to say that you should put yourself in harm's way.
Right.
But it is to say you should learn how to forgive, and you should learn how to show the love of Christ. Right. And there might be a scenario where God wants you to go an extra step with somebody.
Right.
But you need to follow the Spirit with that.
Right.
Yeah, because remember, the Bible doesn't say not to love yourself. It just says to love others more before you love yourself.
Yeah,
because having self-esteem, having self-love, those are absolutely important and so important to be able to do other things. The Bible just says love others more than yourself before yourself.
Yeah, God's not going to he's not going to affirm sins like abuse, and that's not. And I think that's funny because we want to say he's going to affirm the sin. Like, well, a lot of people wish that we would say, oh, well, he's going to affirm the wrong types of love. Like he'll affirm those sins because love is love is love is love. But then when you're like, oh, okay, so love is love is love is love, but the person who's in that abusive, like that, no, God's not going to trade sins. Like sin is sin, and he's not going to stand for some sins but not other sins. Right. And so I think that when we go back and just look at the definition of love. It doesn't seek its own benefit. It's not provoked. It does not keep an account of wrong. I mean, the whole last part of it are all sorts of things about like, this is what love looks like. And then there are scriptures in the Bible. I know we are talking a ton about like marriage concepts of love. So if you're in these kind of marriage relationships where you have abuse and things like that, there are scriptures that speak to that. But at the end of the day, like that's not still, and this sounds crazy, is still not an excuse not to love them. That doesn't mean you need to stay with them, right? But it's still not an excuse. And I will just use this example. I have counseled multiple people through some crazy divorces, and it was not their desire to be divorced. It was just, this is just kind of what was laid. Literally, the paperwork was laid on their lap, and they're like, I don't know what to do. And everything had collapsed. And the one thing we continually talked about through the whole entire process was your job is to love them. No matter what. That doesn't mean your job is to stay married to them and but your job is to love them and to show them through this entire process the love of God.
Absolutely.
And that's not a physical love. It's the love that we talk about in 1 Corinthians.
It's a love that sounds a lot like forgiveness.
Right.
For sure. I think when we're looking at this, the verse 4 through 7, love is patient, love is, it's so important to look at what Paul says before it, because, he's everything he says before this,
Context.
If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and I have a faith that can move mountains, but do not love, I have nothing.
Right.
If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship, that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. This is showing that in everything we do, we are to love.
Right.
You're talking about the gifts of the Spirit. So if you are using your God-given gifts, your talents, your whatever, whether they be in a church setting or whether they be just in your regular job, if you're doing what God has called you to do and doing all of these great things, but you don't do it with a spirit of love, you're missing out, and you're not getting anything for it, and you're not doing it the way that God intended you to do it.
Yeah.
And if you're doing love for self-serving reasons, you've missed it. Like, that's not biblical. That's the Bible does not talk about self-serving love.
No.
Self-surrendering love is actually what it talks about.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it does talk about self-serving love, but it talks about it in the context of selfishness.
Right, yeah.
Right? Because ultimately that's what it is.
Right.
You're trying to please yourself. You're trying to provide yourself with that good feeling and with that dopamine high and all of those things, right?
Right.
And that's because the world has cheapened the concept of love.
Right.
First they reduced it to sex, and then they said it was separate from sex.
Right.
And then and then they always implement something that doesn't need to be there at the time that it doesn't need to be there. You know, they've ruined it. And they overuse it.
Right.
And so do people in the church sometimes as well.
Sure.
I might have mentioned this before, but like when I was in Bible college, I used to have people come up to me all the time and be like, "Oh, Tim, I love you, brother. I love you, man."
Yeah.
And I know my response was always, "Thank you."
Yes. Right.
I didn't say it back.
Again, because you were peers.
That's right. Yeah. Because I was, because I'm stoic, and but the truth is, the reason why I didn't like to repeat that to other people was because to me, to tell someone that you love them, whether that be in a marital sense or in a friendship sense or whatever sense it might be, is to make a commitment to them.
100%.
Right? That you're going to live 1 Corinthians 13:4-7 around them.
Sure.
That you're going to prefer them over yourselves.
Sure.
And it's not that I don't want to do that. It's that excuse me. It's not that I can't do that. It's that I don't want to do that. You know what I mean? Like, I don't trust myself to always be able to do that. And I don't like to write checks that I can't cash. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly, sure.
Yeah.
So, like, I'd have somebody tell me that. I'm like, man, you've known me for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
We are bonded in this brotherhood of Christ, and there's going to be some great things to come. But you know what? I don't know that I'm the David to your Jonathan at this point. Like, let's just.
Hey, next time you should be like, I phileo you too, bro.
Well, that's exactly the point. Right. But that's exactly it. And that's where you get to. Yeah, it doesn't have to be a phileo love.
Yeah,
but it is. But it's an agape love, and that's to anybody.
I feel like in most of those cases, it's a pragma love.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm pragma you too, bro. I'm pragma you too, dude.
The Bible tells me to love you, so I do.
Yeah. When you read verses, so basically in chapter 3 before verse 4, it's almost like, so this was like probably 10 plus years ago, the History Channel did kind of a mini series on the Bible, Oh,
those are always great.
Yes. Yeah, obviously I know it's not super accurate, and and
right.
This
when the aliens delivered the scriptures to Moses, that was my favorite part. Yeah.
And so in one of them, basically there is a scene where basically Paul is speaking this, and obviously they take some dramatic liberties because obviously this was written in a letter. How do you act that? So he's basically in the scene, he's speaking this to a group of people, which is obviously not how it is.
Sure.
But watching that actually really helped me understand this, because he was in a group of people that were just going nuts and wanting to fight. And he said, no, you in all of these things do love. All of these things have love. And it was like, and nobody said this, but he's like, do this and do this. This is the command that God is giving you, to love and have all love and all these things. And then verse 4 is, so this is what that means.
Right.
It's like, okay, well, how do I do that? What do you mean by that? How do I have love? And how can I not have love when I speak prophecies? How can I not do this? How do I have love in that? Well, this is what that means. This is what that love looks like.
Well, and Paul's speaking specifically to like Romans. I mean, not to Romans, but like to Greeks, to people who had goddesses of love and these things so there. I mean, Paul's speaking to the church today, or people today, whose definition of love is sexual. It's maybe even brotherly, but like he's introducing this agape idea, this different kind of love that Jesus kind of introduces into saying like this is the selfless love that I'm talking about. And like you said, we know the church in Corinth had a lot of issues, right? And they had a lot of infighting. And so he's speaking to a group of people who have the idea of love is agreement, right? Like love is we have to agree on everything, and love is love is love, and your definition of love is wrong. So therefore, even though we're supposed to agree on it, I can't love you because he's setting the confusion and the chaos right. And I think that's where the world misses it. Because we come back and we see love and we say love is about me, love is about what I want, and love is about all of the things that meet my needs. And Paul comes back, Jesus comes back and says, no, it's about God, it's about you, and not you, it's about others.
Yeah. Well, here's another one: Philippians 2:3-4. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourself, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others.
Right.
And like this is the teaching of Christ. This is the teaching of Paul, who's saying what Christ told him to say.
Right.
Is that we need to value others above ourselves. That's where this agape love is.
Right.
Right. Now, we mentioned before, love is a fruit of the Spirit.
Right.
And it says in that verse when it talks about the fruits of the Spirit, it says, against these things there is no law.
Right.
Yeah.
That's why it's so important.
Right.
Right. And so, like, in that sense, that's exactly what Jesus was saying. He was like, all of everything hangs on this. Right. And if we don't understand it, then we get it wrong. Right. So we not only need to study it, learn it, and try to practice it, but we also need to be in the Spirit, letting Him teach us. A lot of times that means letting Him put us in situations where we have to practice it.
100%. Well, I was going to say, I think this is funny too, because you read Philippians and it does nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. It's funny because there's a lot of people out there who are good people who say, well, I love other people. I give, but why?
Yeah.
Right. Why are you who are you building up there? You know what I mean? Like, I know a lot of great philanthropists out there who give millions upon billions, who give more money than I'll ever give to boost their own ego.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because when we discussed Philippians and the other episodes that we do for the Bible study episodes.
The real episodes,
the real episodes, where the meat and potatoes are. When Tommy and we broke down Philippians, one of the things that was interesting about Philippians is Paul loved the Philippians. Mm-hmm. Now, Paul loved everybody he wrote an epistle to, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But they were doing great.
Right.
They were doing all the right things, but they did have a few quarrels here and there. And his point was to get them to say, hey, don't lose what you have because you're quarreling over this or that. Mm-hmm. Instead, value each other but over yourselves. And it's kind of very interesting that that's the teaching that he gave to the people who had given him more. He calls them out and he's like, you guys gave to me when no one else would. Right. But then he gives them this teaching of care about others more than you care about yourselves. Right. So.
Well, I think it's because it's easy to, right? Like, I think it's easy to start to pat yourself on the back, right? Like, if you start loving other people and you love really well and you're generous, it's easy to start being like, yeah, I'm generous. I don't need to. I've heard people say, well, I don't need to, I do all of these things. And they list a litany of things that they do. And they're like, I don't need to do anymore. Yeah. And I'm like, well, that might not be true. Right. That. What's God calling you to do? Yeah. So I think that's interesting too, because love isn't dependent on what you have to give. It's about what God calls you to give.
Yes.
Absolutely.
When I think And I kind of remember when we were talking about that in Philippians, one of the things that I brought up was, especially in this time when there's so much said about, you hear about like people quiet quitting their jobs. You hear about like the cool thing to do is set boundaries.
Right, you're right.
Yeah, I read so many, or I see so many articles online, basically people almost bragging about being a jerk, like
Right.
In a way. And it's not exactly that, but they basically saying, I did this for myself, and when I started doing this thing, my life got better,
Right.
and this is what I encourage other people to do.
Right.
And what Philippians said is the exact opposite. Love others, value others above yourself.
Right.
Now that doesn't mean that you can't ever set boundaries.
Right.
Without difference, that doesn't mean that you can't ever take care of yourself. But you said this, I think, really well in your priorities sermon. There is an order of things.
Right.
We are clearly called to love other people. So if that means, staying late for something to do something that wasn't really your job, if that means going out of your way to whatever,
Right.
do it.
Right. Yeah.
Now, I love my wife more than I love other people.
Right.
So I'm going to put my wife above, I'm going to
100%.
put my kids above these other people.
Right.
Yeah.
But I still do whatever I can do to love those other
Right.
people.
Most certainly.
Absolutely.
You
Right.
know.
No, that's great. And it's you mentioned the priority, saying like loving others is a higher priority than ourselves.
Yeah.
Right.
And we've talked a lot about loving others. Let me read Mark 8:34 real quick. Then he, Jesus, called the crowd to him along with his disciples and said, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me." We've talked a lot about loving other people.
Right.
The greatest commandment was to love God.
Right.
Does the definition of love change when we're talking about loving God?
No, I think it's even better. If you read 1 Corinthians 13 in the context of loving God, love is patient. How many people get frustrated with God because he's not answering their prayers? Love is kind. How many people are cruel to God?
Yeah, I always think of God as Gandalf.
Yeah.
He's never early or late. He is always exactly when he intends to be there.
Right. But I mean, I think the reason why we love other people, the reason why we love in general, is because God calls us to love.
Yeah.
See, I think that's the difference. Is the reason why we stick with people, even though the flame has gone out, the fire has gone out, whatever, the passion is lost, is because that wasn't why we were in it to begin with.
Right.
God's call to love. Even in our marriages, even in our friendships, is long. I always tell people that my relationship with you is not dependent on your attendance at my church. Because I think there's a lot of people who, if I'm going to be a part of your life, like you got to be going the same direction with me in life. And I mean, like you got to be in the same areas.
You got to do friendships intentionally.
Intentionally, you're someone. Yeah, and I don't have friends because someone told me they couldn't. Right? I mean, that's part of the story we've shared. Is that I was told I'm not going the same direction. Not that I'm going the wrong direction, just not in the same direction. So we can't be friends anymore. And I think that's not how God works. Now God wants you to be going in His direction.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, so I want to be careful, and it's not like you get to do willy-nilly do what you want. But I think like there's something to be said about the reason why we love has nothing to do with us whatsoever.
Right.
It's because the first commandment is to love God, and God tells us to love others. That's why we love.
Yeah.
It's rooted in a love of priorities. Let's talk about it, right? We talked about this in a sermon series where we talked about buttoning your shirt, and that top button you button is always God, right? Like,
right.
That's where it all begins. That's where Jesus begins.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%. Now, I mean, I'm reading through this again with the context of loving God, and you said, you talked about being patient with God, being kind to God. That's an interesting one. Not being jealous. I think I talked about that a little bit in our last one.
Right,
like feeling like other people were getting too much spiritual attention that hadn't earned it.
Right.
And in that anger, I'm quick to talk about how I've done so many and brag about how spiritual I'm the super spit.
I'm the super spit.
I'm the super spit.
Say you're the super spit. Yeah.
Which is incredibly arrogant.
Right.
Love does not act disgracefully. So like
You're going to act like God calls you to act.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does not seek its own benefit. How many times do you pray because you want something?
100%.
You know, it is not provoked. Like, man, I'm trying to imagine God provoking me.
Right.
I mean, I guess there are things that I read. Sometimes you read things in the scripture and you're like, I can't do that.
Right.
Or, you know, and I know there are people
Right.
who struggle with certain things that read the scripture and say, I don't know if I can do that. And sometimes they get angry. They let themselves be provoked by that and fall into that lie of, well, then God isn't love if he doesn't accept this about me.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Well, and so many people when they hear somebody espouse that the love God, love others, and that takes care of everything. They often think that gives you the right to sin all you want as long as you love God.
Right.
But love does not dishonor.
Right. Right.
You know, and so if you love God, you know, John says this: if you love God, you'll obey His commands, and you'll keep my commands. That's what Jesus said to Peter.
Yeah.
And you know, God, you know, actually it was John that said, if you love God, you will love others by loving others. If you love others, you will love God by doing that. It's like a vice versa.
Yeah.
And so this clearly doesn't give us the right to live in sin or to dishonor God by any means, but honoring God, obeying His commands, that is love.
Right.
And if you do those things, that's loving God.
Right. Well, and I think it's interesting too, because like you said, how does God provoke? I think so often like God provokes, like, how many sermons have you heard and the pastor's like, just have faith. And like, that's the right answer. I mean, that is the right answer. Like, faith it's simple.
Yeah, but tell me what to do.
Right. You know, like that's the provoking though. It's like, come on, God. Like, I know I believe. And I think a lot of times I have fought with God and been like, okay, God, you're taking too long. God, you told me this was going to be like, if your word says, God, if I do this, your yoke is easy, your burden is light. Well, this is heavy and this sucks. Like, but that's not love.
Listen here, God, let me tell you what you said.
Right. Let me tell you. Yeah. It goes on, does not keep an account of wrongs suffered.
I often say in my prayers, God, you told me this. I know you did this. I often say that way more than I should.
But how many accounts do we, like, okay, God, you told me to do this, and this is the accounts of wrongs suffered. Like, God, you told me to do this, I did it, and look what happened. It blew up in my face.
Yeah.
I'm very guilty of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of times God's like, well, I didn't actually tell you to do that, but I think like this is like you said, like, can we look at love that taking up your cross daily and following me, like that idea of, can we apply the same definition of love that we've applied to our marriages, that we've applied to our brothers and sisters in Christ, anybody, our enemies? Can we put that? Heck yeah. Like, that is, because this is the difference between all of the other. And this is, I think, everybody tunes out when you go to Greek, right? Because they're like, I don't care. It's Greek. It's all Greek to me, right? That's a phrase, And so like when they hear agape, they've been kind of Christians have been inundated with that word, but like they're like, yeah, agape. But what I don't think we understand is like God like says, I need to create a whole different word for the type of love I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Like that, this gets at it, because this is the difference between, this love can be applied across the board.
Yeah.
The eros love can't. Like, I can't apply that to you. I mean, I can, but that goes to some.
No, you cannot.
You're getting into other things.
That's another podcast for another time. But yeah.
We're talking about consent next.
Yeah.
And that Mark verse, take up their cross and follow me. I think so many that's really often misunderstood and often misquoted, because when people say, "Yeah, that's my cross to bear," they look at it as it's an addiction they have, or it's something that they have to deal with, which the way that's intended in the New Testament times, in Bible times, the cross meant death, and so to carry. When you carried your cross, you didn't carry your cross home. You carried your cross to die.
Right.
And that's what Jesus did.
Right.
And so carrying your cross means you are dying to yourself.
Exactly.
Right.
100%. That's fantastic. And you mentioned earlier, like how, with this provoking thing, well, you just got to have faith. I think this last line here, faith is really one of the greatest ways we love God.
Right.
It keeps every confidence. It believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things.
Right.
Like faith in God the ability to endure all situations,
Right.
knowing that he has you
Right.
in his hand, that he's not going to fail you.
Right.
Right. You know, it's funny when we get into those other places, we act as though he has failed us,
Right.
but he never truly has.
Right. That's not.
Yeah.
That's not correct. Right.
Now, we have failed him from time to time, and others have failed us. You know, like it's a little bit harder to put your faith in people.
Right.
And
Oh, 100%.
And not always very wise,
Right.
but it is loving
Right.
to give them the benefit of the doubt, to let
Sure.
them, give them the opportunity to be faithful.
100%. Right.
God will always be faithful.
Right.
And so trusting him is one of the best ways that we can love him.
Faith is just a frustrating answer to all of life's problems because it's Faith. Just want to make sure I said, but it's 5 letters.
Yeah.
It's 5 letters, and they're probably some of the hardest 5 letters you'll ever have to.
Yeah.
I mean, that's our whole life. I mean, that's why we have life, is to wrestle with faith, right? To wrestle with our faith. Like that's what God has given us the opportunity to have faith. And so, like you said, it rejoices in those things. That's kind of crazy to think about that, you know?
It is. All right. I feel like that might really be a good place to call this one.
Sure.
You know, I have some more things here, but, you know, we've kind of already covered a lot of these things. I don't think we need to go any further with any of these notes, but I think this has been a good conversation. But I think like most of our conversations, we joke about how long they are. In the context of life and some of these topics, they're actually pretty short. You know,
for
like
sure.
we're probably going to have to re-hit some of these things. Like we did an episode on faith. We're probably going to have to hit that again. at some
Again,
point.
sure.
We'll probably have to find another way to tackle love somewhere down the line.
Yeah, you could do an entire podcast on agape love. You can do an entire podcast on
Yeah.
You do it
Storge.
on what
You could-
the Bible defines as eros love, like
Yeah.
appropriate marriage, God honoring eros love.
You can make either one of those its own.
Be a fun podcast, right? Right. Just 2 dudes sitting here talking about erotic love. Yep.
Well, yeah, I think we're done.
Is that the drums I hear coming in already? Wow, yeah.
yeah. Let's drum this out.
You know, there's actually a 9th love. I forgot to mention this earlier, and it's drum roast. It's an erotic love of drums. Almost mania, if you would, but there's no sin in this love. Yeah, so yeah. Let's hit that drum roast if you wouldn't mind.